So I'm Donna Ornstein-Kerner. Some of you remember me. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to introduce the Kirkland Charter Class Alumni College that marks our 50th anniversary since graduation. For those of you who are new to the Kirkland community, and there may be a few of you in the audience, Kirkland was chartered as an independent coordinate college for women on the Hill in 1965. It opened its doors to the charter class in 1968, and it graduated its last class 10 years later in 1978 before it closed and was absorbed into a newly coeducational Hamilton College. When it opened, it was the first new women's college to be chartered in the East since 1926. And it was planned to be innovative and complementary to the educational curriculum and pedagogy of its academic partner, Hamilton. Indeed, many members of the charter class recall that when they were reviewing college choices and they were visiting different campuses, they were looking for something very consciously different. Many of us remember the iconic advertisement that appeared in Time magazine that prompted us to put in our applications. And it posed the question, when you send your daughter to college, will she get an education? The question was addressed to our parents, but the message was really aimed at us because in those days, the relatively small segment of the American population of women who went to college may have gotten degrees, but college was something that they were passing through between high school and domestic partnerships and kin work. Kirkland promised something different, education that could serve as the start of a lifelong journey that would nurture a love of discovery and learning. Our signature alumni college, Kirkland Conversations with the Charter Class, is designed to help us reflect on how we started this journey and where it has led us. This virtual series that leads up to our spring reunion on the Hill, June 8th to 12th of this year, is designed to jumpstart those conversations that we plan to continue in person and to which you are all most welcome. I'd like to turn the program over now to Sarah Redding Wilson, who is going to introduce our speaker tonight for the Kirkland Business Forum. Sarah.
Thanks so much, Donna, and I really appreciated the history that you went through with the Kirkland College. We are so excited to have Ruth Stevens with us today. She's a terrific graduate and an example of what I think Kirkland was trying to do. And we have a number of people, Elspeth Savage McClellan and Sarah Bell Hitchner and several others are on the business forum trying to coordinate it. And we thought, what better person could we have than Ruth? She consults on customer acquisition and retention, specializing in B2B markets. She advises companies on go-to marketing strategy, sales lead generation, customer and prospect data, content marketing, and ABM. Crain's B2B magazine named Ruth one of the 100 most influential people in business marketing. She also teaches marketing at business schools in the US and abroad. She's taught at Columbia, NYU, Hong Kong, Singapore, Athens, you name it, Buenos Aires, India, she's all over. She's a guest blogger at Biznology, Customer Think, Business to Community, and a contributing writer at Ad Age and Ad Week. She co-hosts the Marketing Horizons podcast, and her newest book is B2B Data-Driven Marketing, Sources, Uses, and Results. Ruth has held senior marketing positions at Time Warner, Ziff Davis, and IBM, and she holds an MBA in addition to coming to school with us. She's got an MBA from Columbia. And I could go on and on and on, but I think it's important for us to hear from Ruth and the words of wisdom she plans to share with us today. So Ruth, I'm so glad to welcome you to our first forum, and we're proud to have you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was so nice. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. I was really, really flattered to be invited to be the first speaker in this fun Kirkland Conversations. And I have so much to talk about. I'm going to make it as condensed as I can, but I also wanted to put this in the context of how, you know, Kirkland has impacted my life, and being given this opportunity allowed me to think some fond thoughts and go over some memories. And I really thank you all, Elspeth and Donna and Janet and Lenny and Susan. And Jane, I think, was also on the committee, and Sarah Bell, for giving me this chance to look back and reflect on how Kirkland has impacted my life as a business person over the years. So I settled on this topic of being a global professor of business, specifically marketing. And the reason I'm really interested in that is because it's been a really fulfilling way for me over the years to learn and to grow, which I think is one of the Kirkland, you know, maxims. And on a practical level, I've also really found teaching abroad to be a really great method of travel. You know, instead of, you know, traveling as a tourist and staying in a hotel and museums, I'm actually living in a society and participating in the society. And I get an identity that way and a purpose and sort of an instant social life as well. So it's really satisfying, and I still get to do the tourist things. So it's a win-win. And I've been playing around with this since 2002, when I was teaching at Columbia Business School, my business school alma mater, and a colleague. So I'll pick up from the Athens College event, where I was really thrilled to be invited to teach for 3 weeks in their business school, and I really caught the bug there. Since then, I've taught in about a dozen or more universities, and it's always been a great opportunity, and it's something that I've been able to continue with into my 70s, which is especially nice. And so if you asked me what's the you know, how this all started, I think I would begin with well, I'll begin with Kirkland and our beloved Dean Inez Nelbach, where so going back, here we are on our first day. Charter class friends, of course, we all remember this with great affection. And can you find yourself, my charter class mates, in the picture here? I put a little green arrow next to my head there in the right of the, if you can find yourself in this picture, would you just mention it in the chat? Might be fun to hear who you're sitting next to. And me, I'm sitting next to Connie Sion and Kathy Doss. And I think that's Lisa Sinclair next to her. I think, not really sure. But remember, we all, after this convocation, we all walked together over to the construction site known as the Kirkland campus. And I'm sure many of our parents were questioning our choice of college when they were dropping us off. But really, this is really where it all began for me with Dean Nelbach. So let me tell you this little story. I was lucky enough to have a brother and sister-in-law who were in the Peace Corps that year in Sarawak, which is a tiny country that's part of the Malaysian Federation. You can see Sarawak in the lower right of this map. And I was invited by my brother and sister-in-law to go visit for the summer after our freshman year. you can see that little star in the lower right. That's the town that they were living in. The picture above shows actually the hospital of the town, but Doug Raybeck will confirm that this is what an upriver town sort of looks like. And I was lucky enough to head up to Kanawit, up the Rajong River. You had to get there. There were, it was jungle and with towns carved out. And so I arrived there on a boat up the river, and really I just absolutely loved it. Now, this is on the island of Borneo, believe it or not, and it really just opened my eyes to another world. And I kind of took to Asia just immediately. Now, this was the summer of 1969, right? And so we've got the Apollo 11 moonwalk on July 20th, and we've got Woodstock in mid-August. And we all remember these pivotal events in our young lives. I've got a story about the moonwalk that I can tell you later if you're interested, but I missed all of that. But I absolutely loved the feel and the atmosphere and the food and the people that I met that summer. So on my return, and this is where Dean Nelbach comes in, I was just dying to figure out a way to get back to Asia. And through a family connection, I was lucky enough to learn that Yale was running a Chinese language program in Hong Kong. And so I went in to see Dean Nelbach, and I asked her if I could take a junior year abroad in Hong Kong at the Yale Chinese Language Center. And in her Kirkland-like way, she agreed. Isn't that amazing? I mean, really, I'm impressed and thrilled. So I went off to the Chinese Language Center at New Asia College. It's here on the left. I mean, it looks pretty dreary, and but Hong Kong is actually a very vibrant and charming city, as many of you know. They put me in a dorm with 3 other girls, 2 bunk beds, and a 9 o'clock curfew, if you can imagine that. And so I took Chinese language lessons every morning from 9 to 12. And in the afternoon, I played around in Hong Kong, sightseeing and trying to find things to do. And one of the high points was a visit during January from my college boyfriend, John Tobin. I know many of you knew John, and his roommate, Dave Paris, is on the call tonight. So Dave, you of course remember that trip that John made to Hong Kong. And so after a year there, I returned to Kirkland. I graduated. I taught high school for a couple of years. And then I went to Japan, where I stayed for 8 years. I was teaching English and then working as an editor in an English language publishing company. And I returned to New York in 1982 and went to Columbia to get an MBA because I felt I was really behind. And I then had a corporate career in marketing for about 15 years. And toward the end of my career, I started teaching marketing in the professional ed division of NYU and, continuing ed. And later, I was invited to join the faculty at Columbia Business School. I was really thrilled, and I was an adjunct professor there. And then when I went out on my own as a consultant in 2000, I called up the director at NYU continuing and said, can you give me more classes? Because I need, I need time to build my consulting practice. So, and that's when I started going to places like Athens and Singapore to teach. And here's the cool thing. Oh, let me just point out my textbooks from the Yale and China Language Center that you can see here on the right. They are still in my apartment. I took this picture, and they're just beloved of me, and I thumb through them every now and then. But the most amazing thing happened in the form of being invited to teach at the University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong. Oh my goodness, here I am full circle. I can't tell you how great this university is. It's out in Northeast Hong Kong territory called Clearwater Bay. And look at that clear water and all the adorable islands. I could see these from my office. The students, whom you can see in the upper right, were ambitious and interested and really fun to be with. And so there I am full circle. I just thank you, Ines Nelbach, for getting this started. And I just had a wonderful time there in 2016. I liked it so much, I went back again the following year. And that first year that I visited, I actually tracked down the Yale and Chinese Language Center. It's in a completely different area. It's now in the New Territories. And I made an appointment and went to visit, kind of out of sentimentality and appreciation. And I'm a little embarrassed, but not totally. When I met this charming man, who's the current director, and I sat down with him in his office and told him about my experience in 1969, and I started to weep. Isn't that, amazing? Here I am, back in Hong Kong, 45 years later, and just feeling really, really sentimental. But that's my full circle story from Dean Nelbach and Kirkland back to Hong Kong again. And so this thing that I've been doing really for more than 20 years now has led me to opportunities all over the world. And I found out just a few years ago that there's actually a name for this thing. It's called academic tourism, like, medical tourism. And sure enough, I've been unwittingly practicing it for several decades now. And here's some of the wonderful cities I've been in. I spent, just before the pandemic, I was 2 years in a row at the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. What a terrific school. I was so proud and excited to be there. And the one in the upper right-hand corner here is Athens College. I think some people on the call will recognize it. And I'm lined up, you guys, in April to teach for a month at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. This is, of course, if Putin permits it. And also, anything can happen these days. We have no real, we can't really count on anything anymore. But I would love to go back and visit any of these universities again. And I have ideas for other places I'd like to go in the future. So now the pandemic, shut me down, but I've got Krakow on the calendar. And I did promise, as part of this discussion, to share with you my method for getting foreign teaching gigs. So here it is. First, I pick a destination. And, this is just totally on whim, or I've heard from someone that it's a really interesting place to visit. And then I find out what is the top business school there. And I've been to I've made the mistake of going to lesser business schools, and it's just not as much fun as being at a really, really top school. And in India, by the way, the IIM Bangalore is one of the top 2 business schools in all of India. So it's a really great quality, and I had a blast there. So I find out the top business school, and this is available through, asking around, and there's also rankings. Usually a local person will, know immediately what's the best school there. And then I try to get in there, and LinkedIn has been an extraordinary resource for that. I'll find somebody who attended there, or in the case of Jagiellonian in Krakow, I found an American who had taught there. So I learned the entire scoop about how to get a teaching gig from him. Sometimes I ask my department chair at Stern. He's a very well-connected marketing academic, and he knows a lot of people. Or I'll just cold call by finding the email address of the department chair or the dean, and really 9 times out of 10, I get an answer and get invited. I've also kind of cynically added some helpful facts in the green box to the right. I've noticed that I happen to have some advantages that make me a relatively desirable candidate for a adjunct visiting professor post. I've also found that if I'm willing to take local wages, it's much easier to get a gig. And they sort of like to brag about my affiliation with was Columbia, now NYU Stern, so that helps. Now, let me just wrap up here with how I see Kirkland playing in all of this, beyond just, Dean Nelbach and her letting me craft my own junior year abroad. That was the first ticket. But then when I came back, holy moly, it turned out that either Kirkland or Hamilton, I'm pretty sure it was Kirkland, had established a so-called critical languages program. Did any of you participate in this? Martha Hawley and I, and thanks for coming tonight, Martha, studied Mandarin at Kirkland using a tape recorder, and we also had the incredible benefit of language lessons from Morris Wills, who is a librarian at Utica College. Just parenthetically, let me mention that he had been in the US Army in the Korean War, and he was captured by the Chinese Army and treated pretty miserably. But he ended up staying in China for 12 years, married a Chinese woman, had a child, and then made his way back to upstate New York, and eventually got a job at Utica College, and somehow stumbled into meeting with Martha and me once a week. We were so lucky to have that exposure. And of course, Hamilton had expanded its Asian Studies program with the arrival of Pete Suttmeyer and Bill Sneed. The Hill was becoming more international. I was more international. And I also credit the amazing undergrad experience that we all had, and friendships that I still treasure today. So let's talk. And I'll also mention, I'm really looking forward to Rob Dretler's talk and Josh Simpson's talks coming up. And thanks again for this fun opportunity for me anyway, to share my story. So I'm gonna take these slides away and let's chat.
Yes, I'm gonna help. And Ruth, I was actually gonna ask before you took the slides away, and I was a little too slow, but could you put up the Pew photo again? Because a few people put in the chat where they were.
Oh, brilliant.
Yes.
I will certainly do that.
And so I would love to see where where they were.
And I also came across just today some old Kirkland charter class reunion photos that I attached to this PowerPoint. So if we want to look at them, we can do that as well. So let's find out where people are.
So we have Lisa Sinclair, and she said she's in the same row with you.
Yep, right here. I don't know if you all can see my yellow arrow. Oh, sorry. Yes, indeed. There's Lisa.
And then Elaine, do you want to unmute and explain where you are?
I am kind of 2 rows behind Ruth. If you go over to the right, I'm in the middle there.
There you are, Elaine.
I had
Gotcha.
dark hair.
Indeed.
And sitting next to me, I remember Abby Patterson, who I think
Mhm.
has passed away, and I can't remember
that
the
Abby?
person. Yeah, that's her with a hat on,
Yes.
but I don't know much more than that. I don't know who else is in the row.
Janet put in the chat where she is. Janet, do you want to unmute and
Is that-
tell us who you're sitting next to?
Is this Janet?
I am on the right-hand side, almost in the back, in front of a man and behind a woman or with blonde or gray hair. And I have my arm up on the side of the pew.
Oh, yes. You're
Short
so
hair.
cash. You're so
Right there.
cash, Janet.
Yeah.
Very nice.
All right. And then our first question is a formal question, not on the photo picture, is
All
from
right.
Sarah Bell. So if you want to stop the screen share, and we're
Indeed.
going to also spotlight Sarah Bell.
Well, one of my questions, this is my first one, Ruth, is not everyone is a B2B marketing expert, and you haven't given us a clue about how you ended up in B2B marketing. Where does that come from?
Oh, thanks. Thanks. It's pretty simple. My first job out of business school was at Book of the Month Club, a division of Time Warner, where I lasted 7 years, and I had learned direct marketing there, direct response communications. As you know, direct marketing or direct response communications is all about using data to select audiences and try to motivate them to take some kind of action, like buy something or visit your store or attend an event. And with those skills, I was then hired at Ziff Davis, a computer industry computer industry magazine publisher in New York. And that's where I landed in the B2B world, and I just loved it. So after a couple of years at Ziff, I went to IBM, and then I went out on my own. So it was really learning on the job. The reason I loved B2B is that it's so much more complicated than consumer marketing. There are lots of parties involved in making a purchase decision, and you have to figure out who these people are and how to persuade them that you have the right solution for their business. So it can take 24 months before they make a purchase decision. So it's really complicated and therefore more fun, in my opinion.
And
Thanks,
someone in
Ryan.
our chat said that they crossed paths with you when you were at IBM. I'll have to speak up. I don't remember who it was at the moment.
Oh, who's that?
Liz Rubin. I saw you at
Liz.
IBM,
Liz
and I don't remember where I was working at the time, but I'm gonna guess it's White Plains area. But that's when you were working for IBM.
Indeed. Yeah, I was there from 96 to nine in the mid 90s. I don't really have it. Yeah, thanks.
All right, and I just before we let you go, Sarah Bell, from the spotlight, could you talk about your Swahili, and then we can hear a few other people with critical languages or language.
Did you have a native speaker available like Martha Hawley and I had?
No, I know Donna will be intrigued with this. I toyed with the idea of being an anthropology major, Clara Nicholson, and I think it was all freshman year, probably one of those court courses, and I took Swahili for at least a semester, maybe two. And as I remember it, it was on tape. I don't remember any native speaker. And I don't remember anyone else taking it with me, but I'd love someone to speak up and say, oh, I was doing it too.
Well, Carolyn York says that she studied Mandarin.
Mandarin.
I never studied Swahili at Kirkland, Sarabelle, but I do know later on, and maybe Carolyn, that's when you took Mandarin. I don't know, but critical languages became a real feature of the Hamilton curriculum, and Ginger Miller, I think, was, or maybe Kirkland and Hamilton, but Ginger Miller was the person who was the administrator working on that program, and they may not have had native speakers on campus, but part of the way they taught critical languages was to bring a native speaker at some point during the semester to administer an exam so that you could determine what your level of proficiency was. Is that right, Carolyn? Is that your experience?
Yes, I mean, I was doing Mandarin and there were native speakers. The one who I worked with the most was Esther Shao, I believe, who sadly is deceased. But she met with me and another student, a Hamilton guy, who were both studying Chinese. And I mean, I had done it for the summer before at Cornell in an intensive program. So I wasn't new to the language, thank goodness. I think that would have been very hard. But thanks, Esther met with us weekly and we went through the tapes. And then at the end of the semester, someone from Cornell, from the program I had been in, would come up and do the exam. And interestingly, I went on this search through my house recently to find all my evaluations. And I remember seeing those. And I also did it as one of my winter studies, by the way. But when I looked at them, they were all listed as independent studies. Mm-hmm. So I think they weren't like Chinese 201 or anything. So
if I can interject here, a little bit of context, you know, I just want to mention that Ruth's story here, and there are other really interesting study abroad stories from the Kirkland files, were very unusual in those days. I mean, I would not have thought of, for example, going to the field site where I eventually ended up spending 30 years of my life, more or less, in Africa when I was an undergraduate, because at the time that we were going to college, study abroad was really pretty much confined to Europe. Mm-hmm. It's not like today where students are going all over, well, not during the pandemic, but before the pandemic, they were going all over the world. And it's almost kind of expected. They go on short programs and summer programs and semester-long programs, but really it was only the language majors that I knew at Kirkland and Hamilton that went on the Hamilton programs to Spain, to Vienna, you know, to France and so on. And they're very well-known programs to this day. But very few of us were going off the beaten path. And that's part of the story here of why Inez was so amazing, because, you know, somebody came in and said, I want to go here. And she said, okay, let's make it happen. Or I want to study Mandarin. Oh, we don't have that. Well, let's make it happen. And that was part of the innovative piece of the story that I think makes it so special, makes Ruth's story so special.
I'd like to chime in here. I don't know if any of you, particularly anthro majors, remember Grant Jones?
Oh, yes.
Because I went on the 414 program for January. I went to Guatemala, Mexico, and it was British Honduras then and not Belize. Yeah. And I was the only girl. And the rest were Hamilton. There were 8 Hamilton people. And we had quite a few stories to tell, which I won't go into here. But it was a fascinating experience. But I wouldn't call that going through up the Yosemite River in a dugout canoe as the normal European trip. But that was available to us, and I thought that was terrific. But I also think it also shows the coordination between Kirkland and Hamilton. So I just wanted to throw that in. Little.
Could I chime in here too? I think I must have absorbed something on critical languages when I was at Kirkland because, like you, I did the 414. I went to the Experiment in International Living in Vermont for a European language, French. But 7 years after we graduated, I had the opportunity to, I was a reporter, and the Rotary Foundation was offering journalism awards to go any place in the world to 50 journalists. And I was fortunate enough to get one. And then you, the recipient, had to gain admission to some higher education institute. And so I decided, instead of going to a country that would be having Peace Corps volunteers, that since my way was being paid, I would go to a place that was probably going to be more prohibitive for me expense-wise. So I went to the Stockholm Journalism School and was surprised when they came back and said, not only are we giving you the fellowship to be gone for 12 months, but because Swedish is considered a critical language, is spoken by so few people, we're giving you language studies. So sort of like Ruth, although we actually were there all day, all summer. The summer before I started my program in the fall at the journalism school, and we didn't. As I learned Swedish that summer, we never spoke a word of English because most of the people in my class were young men who'd been sent by their families out of Iran to get away from the Khomeini and being involved with that worldwide situation. So anyway, I understand, and I think for many people, critical language is a successful pathway.
May I ask whose voice that was?
I'm sorry, this is Nancy Gay Barger.
Oh, good. Thanks, Nancy Gay.
Can you?
No,
how can I make you see me? Your video is stopped.
We want to see you.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, here I am. Here I am. Yeah.
You know, I have to laugh. You guys are all talking about how all these language skills you have. I was just so glad to pass the French language test that we math majors had to take to graduate. I thought I will never graduate from this school because I'll never pass the test. I can tell you I went on that trip, but I didn't have to speak the language because I would have been in trouble. But anyway, I'm so impressed with the skills you guys have. It's outstanding.
Language is, if you have an interest in it and you take to it, I do think it's a wonderful pathway. And I love following Ruth on Facebook, where she renews her friendships all over the world. And I'm sure a lot of that is being able to speak the language.
You know, one of my suite mate roommates was Liz Rapley, and she took Arabic. But I don't know if it was part of that same program. And because there's so many Lebanese, there's a big Lebanese community in Utica.
Right.
And it was a local Lebanese guy who taught her. But I don't know if she was part of that program or whether this was just like a self-study thing that she picked up.
Fantastic. I didn't know about that, Susan.
We've got a question in the chat about the possibility of teaching from somebody who's owned a PR agency since 1987, but without a master's degree. So what's your take on the kind of credentials you have to teach? I mean, you're suggesting start at the top, try to find out whatever is the Harvard of, whatever country you want to go to, but what about possibilities for lower tier schools if you don't have an MBA?
So that's Nathana, right?
Yeah. Hi, Ruth. How are you?
Hi. I'll go find an article I wrote about how to become a college professor with just what you know.
Right. Well, I did that. I was at the new school and I had a great gig, and
Right.
I was teaching public relations for food professionals. And the beauty of that was that once they ended the class, they all wanted to hire me It was at a time when I
Oh.
was just really not interested in working that much or teaching that much. So unfortunately, I let go of that gig, but it was really well paying and it was great.
All right, so business development strategy for you.
Right. So, but not really, because it was just, I didn't need more business at that point. And I didn't want to give up the time for teaching, but now it would be really fun because all I do now is consulting. So that I'm really not doing any implementation. I'm just doing strategies and all different things like that. So that I take, and I do crisis, so I do very, very specific work. So, but I love teaching,
So
because I have,
the
I mean,
answer is-
especially since and I do teach it I used to teach at the new school and now I'm teaching at Baruch.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yeah. So it's like, I love teaching. So I just keep teaching, but I'm not sure how to do it, but I have contacts in Malaysia and my daughter has, she has clients all over Asia. So I guess I could start with Malaysia because we have really good contacts there.
Yeah.
Ruth's put a link to her article on this in the chat.
Okay,
for those of
great.
you who are
Great.
And this is,
interested. I'm
yeah.
going to write it down too.
thanks, Donna. This is not, at some point I need to write an article about how to get foreign teaching gigs. Sort of the way I described to you guys tonight. But this was I wrote this in reaction to really scores of people in our demographic, our age group saying, hey, I've had this great career and I really would like to give back, or I'd like to, help. How do I get a teaching gig? And I wrote down everything I know about how to do that in this article.
Right.
And I mentioned, the reason I posted it here is that I mentioned the question of a master's degree. And typically an advanced degree of some sort is a requirement, but not always.
No, I mean, I've been published. It's like, it's not a big deal. I know how to do that. But I'm wondering if you have any contacts that I could contact in Malaysia, or I've been to Hong Kong as well. I could do Hong Kong. I could do anywhere.
I do know.
Or if you have any in Europe.
Malaysia. And Doug Raybeck knows people in Malaysia too.
Okay.
Let's talk offline and
okay. And
I'll
also,
share
I'm looking also in Europe
connection.
because I'll be in Europe this summer.
It would be my pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
And
Sarah
Janet,
got another,
Janet had a question
Oh, Janet
about.
has a question? Okay, Janet.
No,
No, I didn't have a question. But on
Okay.
the subject of learning languages overseas, some of us go for other reasons. I spent the first half of my junior year in Bangkok because my father was in Vietnam and my mother and my brother had moved to Bangkok, and I was gifted with people who were willing to do independent studies with me on things that were really pertinent to my surroundings, like existential phenomenology. But
Wow.
they were that and some poetry, but they were so flexible that while it seemed like total disconnect from where I was, since I grew up in the Foreign Service, it wasn't unusual to be overseas, but I hadn't been to Asia before. So it was very different for me. And the flexibility of Kirkland really made that possible. So
Yeah.
I'll let that go.
Great.
I think I hit my phone the wrong way. Sorry if that looked like I had a question.
Yeah, that's okay. So shall we look at the one from Sarah Bell here, Donna?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was muted for a minute. Sarah Bell had a question about your path to success and how we in our cohort define what a successful career is. Many of us, we'll be talking more about this at the reunion, but from the data we've gotten back from the charter class suggests that many of us have had serial careers. And so Sarah Bell would like you to comment on that. What was it that took you in these different paths, do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure many of us have read articles about how you have more success if you have a goal and you plan, and there are all these studies of, Harvard grads who set a goal and who didn't set a goal, and the ones who set goals were vastly more successful, although I question how, the definition of success. That's really what it boils down to. To me, the definition of success is to feel happy and satisfied every day. And that, I mean, none of us have that purely, but like Sarah Bell's hypothesis here, I really do value variety, and that's kept me stimulated. I didn't mention the missteps I've taken here because you asked me to sugarcoat everything and make my journey sound more fabulous than it really was. But I made the mistake of going into the family business right out of Kirkland, and it was a disaster. I used the term family business with a little bit of tongue in cheek. My father was a boarding school headmaster, and I went to teach at the Taft School in Connecticut, and I sucked at it. Wait, I should turn off the recording. I was not a good teacher to 14-year-olds. And I still avoid teaching undergrads today. I mostly stick with graduate students. But the reason I went to Japan was I was sort of running away from those mistakes I had made immediately out of Kirkland. And I know that the reason I took those jobs was the discomfort I had in the spring of our senior year when we were all running around asking each other questions. So what are you going to do after graduation? Do you remember that? I didn't have an answer. And so I took the first job opportunity that came along and really wish I hadn't.
Sometimes learning from your mistakes is the best.
Indeed.
The best.
But let's discuss Sarah Bell's theory here. Do you think the Kirkland mindset does welcome a change every 5 years, like Sarah Bell's hypothesizing here? Are we all variety seekers?
I think part of it is that we are willing to jump in where we probably shouldn't, or, according to the, where you say, well, I think I'll go to Japan. Why not? We don't see why we shouldn't make that change. I guess that's a little bit what I see of Kirkland. And I always said, I'm not sure whether I was lucky or or smart. I don't know. Sometimes you have these choices that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to make if you'd had a more traditional path.
I think risk takers. I think people are more risk tolerant to be in a new first class of a new college, I think.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I have very little fear of failure, even though, I can fail miserably, but I don't fear it. And I think that's partly Kirkland. I mean, maybe even I went to Kirkland.
It's funny. I don't think of myself as a risk taker. And yet when I look at the things I've done and choices I've made, probably starting with Kirkland was the very first one. And it worked out so well that I sort of, for there on out, felt like, well, if my gut says I could try this, I think I'm going to do it. And there have been very few cases where that hasn't played off for me.
And whose voice is that?
Susan Bickford is speaking.
Susan,
that's the art major who ended up in tech as a tech.
And a high tech, right. Went to Spain.
And a best-selling novelist.
Yeah, oh yes, right.
That's
yes.
recent.
I moved to Spain, moved to Spain on a whim, because my sister was there for a semester or so, ended up staying a couple of years, moved to France, stayed a couple of years, came back, got an MFA, thought, oh, I don't really want to be an artist, fine artist anymore. Let me go into high tech. Just like, oh, okay, let's move to California. Okay, that's the way it goes.
We don't have a lot of time, but there is a question in the chat, and you may be able to answer it quickly, Ruth. I'm not sure, but Will Beebe asked the question about whether you went on all these adventures solo, or were you with a partner and a family? And that's a whole other big topic of conversation, I think, for us to continue, maybe when we're all together. But did you want to just respond to Will, Ruth?
Yeah, so yeah, I do most of my traveling solo. I find it fun and delightful. I had a 25-year wonderful marriage to a man who is very tolerant of my taking off. and now I'm in a 12-year relationship with a man who is less tolerant, and we're negotiating all the time about, like, he wants to visit in Krakow, but he's more worried about Putin than I am. So we've got all these issues to discuss. But I recognize, Will, if maybe your larger question is, what is the impact of having home and, you know, family responsibilities? I've generally been, I haven't had those, other than, you know, a husband. Had more freedom than many, I think.
Yeah, and this is the kind of dilemma anthropologists confront all the time, of course, and that's why I say I think there's a bigger conversation for us to have, you know, about that. But do we have one last question? I think we might have time for one last question.
Remember when B.B. Busick, or who was it, who said, "Girls, you can't have it all"? That really rang poorly in the ears of us Kirkland freshmen.
And you notice she didn't stay. She didn't stay very long, B.B. Busick, if that was the person who said that. Well, I want to take this moment on behalf of the charter class to thank you all for joining us here tonight for this first in the Alumni College series, and Ruth for taking the risk of being the first. And the Kirkland conversations with the charter class is going to continue. Please check your email for our next upcoming one, and which will be in March, and it's going to be put on by the Spirituality Forum, entitled Spirituality, Hope in Dark Times. It's going to be an interfaith dialogue with charter class members who have been engaged in all manners of spiritual work, counseling, and the ministry. It's going to be followed by another forum in April by folks who have been working in the area of law, politics, and social justice. And our final forum leading up to our reunion on the Hill is going to be focused on some of the hot button education issues that we're all reading about these days, how schools and school boards have now become the new focus of the culture wars. So all of those will be appearing. You'll see invites on the Facebook pages, and you'll certainly get them through My Hamilton Connect. Please join us, and we're so pleased that you could be with us tonight. We hope to see you again soon. I'll be putting my contact information here in the chat for anybody who would like to reach out and who has any questions. And again, thank you so much, Ruth. Please be safe, everybody, and have a great night.
And let's also thank Sharon Rippey and Nancy Huckabee and Victoria and the team for.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Sharon, of course. It was great.